move to questions, answers, any contribution you would like to make from, I don't know if there are also online some questions. Jill, you would like to start? There's a mic, there's a... Wait, just a second, there is a microphone for you.
Good morning.
Does it work? Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. Can you hear me? Really interesting talks. Thank you so much. I feel so inspired by everything that you've had to say. I'm Jill Litt from IS Global in Barcelona, and I'm not a gerontologist or a geriatrician. I public health, environmental epidemiology, but I collaborate with Laura and her team at UBIC. One question I had, so we are running a large consortium called Recetas on loneliness and nature-based solutions. I'm just curious, because what we've noticed in our 6 cities around the globe is that loneliness is not something that every culture and every society and social actors accept or want to name, and they want to come at it from a different direction. They don't like the alienation that it might cause. So in France, we've had this as an issue for many, many months, actually over a year, trying to figure out how to work in the community. So I was curious how in the community you worked, had you done workshops to explore this topic and how people relate to it, especially across language? And then the second question I had was just, I'm curious where existential loneliness fits in, especially if we think about younger people. And I wondered if you could comment on that, both all the speakers.
Yeah, thank you so much for the questions. I think, so for the first question about how do you work with communities when you don't know the concept or how people locally actually interact with this concept. I think it's really, really important to spend a lot of time in the communities before you do an intervention or do anything more specific. And I'd worked in Myanmar before on loneliness, so 2018-19. So I lived in Myanmar for a year, so I really understood the culture and the concept of loneliness as well. And people were very open to talk about loneliness there, surprisingly open when I did the initial interviews there. But then when I came to Thailand, I initially did focus groups about loneliness, about care, with Thai older people and with Myanmar older migrants in the same community. And it was such a strong difference between the Myanmar groups that were very open about talking about loneliness compared to the Thai participants, where I had a really hard time getting to the topic. So for example, in the Myanmar groups, maybe it was also because they all had the same experience of migrating, of kind of feeling a little isolated, disconnected as well from their families who were still in Myanmar, many of them, but also the architecture they lived in. So speaking about problems, then the neighbors, they heard them because the walls were so thin. So there was like this common ground of we have certain problems and we feel lonely, and we're also open to talk about it, but also my own positionality, because I speak Burmese, I lived in Myanmar, so I could really easily connect to those older people. Versus in the Thai groups, at first I had this impression, or people told me like, oh, nobody feels lonely here. We don't have any problems. Why are we actually here? So it's really hard to get to them. And I had to use very indirect questions to get to the topic of loneliness and the concept. And that's where also this SRE framework really helped, because we talked about expectations of when are you disappointed? What expectations do you have for your relationships? And that helped us understand to get to the topic without using loneliness as the word. So yeah, then I decided to only do the photo voice with Myanmar migrants, but also because I saw a stronger need in that community or in that subpopulation than in the Thai older adults. But I also wrote these challenges down in a paper that I published recently, so happy to send a link.
You know, it's interesting from the language point of view. In English, loneliness nearly always has a pejorative sense, whereas Ma Solitude, George Moustaki's song, in France, it's different. Einsamkeit in German has a romantic, sentimental, and other elements to it. So, and yet, obviously, the existential suffering is something that clearly is universal across cultures. I do think this framework is really nice, and perhaps rephrasing it around expectations rather than, is a much more positive way of looking at it. It would be interesting across generations and teasing out those elements. But language certainly shapes experience. And the question around existential and contingent is also really interesting. And I suppose as I'm reflecting between the Burmese and the Thais, the Burmese are all displaced. They've gone through, a loss in a way that for the Thai is not as clear cut. So, yeah, no, interesting. You've raised some really interesting thoughts here.
Thanks.
I profit of the fact that I was close to the microphone. So I'm Julia from University of Catalonia, Polytechnic University of Catalonia. Thank you so much, Samia, Desmond, Laura, and Danielle. Very interesting presentation. So I have a comment and a question. So one comment comes from the linguistic point of view, because language shapes our thoughts and our action and vice versa. And once I studied linguistic morphology of Proto-Indo-European languages. When you feel lonely, maybe it happens. And so in ancient Greek, the word aging is gerasko, that has the same suffix of gignosko or teknexko. So I get to know and I get to die, and it means I get to grow. So aging means I get to grow, and the sko is a suffix that means it's a process. So in the ancient philosophy, we already knew that we are in a process. So even when you turn 30, it's a process towards something. So it's not just the deadline of something. And I guess this is beautiful to recover also. And another observation that is more related to a question. So I'm also volunteer in an association that is Cycling Without Age. And I, yes, and I also wrote a Marie Curie project that I will be running at IS Global on that. So it's connecting intergenerational values and sustainability and aging. So it sounds exciting, but as a volunteer, so putting off my academic hats, I find it really difficult when I want to help people that maybe feel lonely or whatever, and really a short percentage of people who can access this service that is totally free on voluntary base is really keen on getting on the bike. And not because I'm from Naples and I really drive badly around the city, they don't know this, but because for people who really would need the closeness to another generation, get fresh air, see the sea, the nature, few of them, like I can say maybe the 10%, if I could be optimistic, really know they need this and they accept they need this and they jump on the bike. And I can see, because we as volunteers have some days in which we can invite whoever, our neighbors, our friends, mother, father. No one goes with me, and not because I drive badly. Again, I mean, how do you get people who really needs this involved in such initiative, Photo Voices or whatever? Thank you.
I don't know, is this addressed at someone in particular or a general?
No.
Well, maybe one comment to it. It's really interesting what you say with this acceptance. Let's say in this particular case, it's loneliness. So accepting loneliness and really then realizing one feels lonely and one wants to do something about it, and get out and be engaged. That's something we found in Myanmar, and how people coped with loneliness. And those people really told us these two strategies. So first of all, the first burden is really to accept that you are in the stage and that you need help, as in you need to do something about it. And then the second stage is really engaging. And about the how to, it is definitely a challenge to reach people like this, because they are usually, maybe also isolated, but there's also certain cultural ideas or expectations that in dignity, right, and loss of face. So really, I think it's really challenging as well. I don't have one solution of how to do this now, how to engage people like this. But maybe someone else has experience with.
Yeah, I would like to reflect about this cycling for aging, right? I think without age, I think it comes from Denmark, if I'm not wrong. Okay, because Aske Lassen, who I think the paper I referred, did the work on that, active aging and cycling and this initiative in Denmark. And I think the cultural aspect is very, very important because in Denmark, you know, being active and then exercising is something that is very much enrooted in the daily life of people. So when this kind of innovative initiatives travel around the world, we need to be cautious about this because sometimes we try to implement something that works there because it's a very particular cultural context, and here might work in a different way, and people might be reluctant to get engaged so I think it's very important to problematize what is good or bad when we do this kind of things, but try like in the local context to explore with the participants what is good and bad aging for them, and then from there try to, you know, invent an intervention or design an intervention. I think that's very important. I think it goes in the same direction as Desmond and you were saying. So I think it's because I think we have a problem with aging, that we have a very paternalistic approach, and we tend to think, oh, this is good for them, but we don't ask. I mean, that's one of the things. And if you go to disability, it's impossible because people say, no, you know, I have to be involved. I want to decide what's good and bad. But in aging, we don't have we lack this culture of, you know, thinking about all the people as empowered and with ideas about what is good and bad for their own aging. And I think that's important. And the cultural aspect, I think, is very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I've been quite involved around arts and health, and one of the real challenges, very similar to this, is two things. First of all, is to encourage people across the lifespan to engage. But there's very useful advice from an unusual quarter. There's a great book, Ways of Curating, by Hans Ulrich Obrist, who's a great art curator. And it's about getting that balance between working with what people like already, but also that thing that Barnum said, that people don't know what they want until you show it to them. But I do think the danger sometimes is we come with what we think is a good thing, and we haven't adequately perhaps looked at what their tastes and preferences are. So it's I certainly recommend his book, Ways of Curating, as a way of approaching this.
Yeah, and this is where also like participatory research comes in, right? Like really bottom-up research and working with participants and what they want and how they imagine a change.
Someone said. Yeah.
An example of this biking without age problems for how to get there people in Receta's project. It was an activity that it was in our menu, and we offered to the participants the possibility to do this. And especially for older people, it's like they don't need to go biking because they have never been going biking. And for them, it was like, it's something that I'm not going to by their own. Maybe if you organize them and they try and they realize that they like, but without this previous work, it just, they feel it's not for them because they don't feel comfortable around a bike. They feel insecure because they have never bike around the city. So we need to really put more efforts or somehow facilitate that they can do that, or ask them what they really want to do.
Thank you very much. Are there questions online? Are there questions in the Zoom, or is anybody else does to make any comment or any question? We have a very successful cycling without age in Cardedeu, which is another size of town, and they are going 2 bikes, so 4 people, at least 2 volunteers, another with another bike, and it's like going around your hometown, maybe and meeting friends, going to meaningful places, joining activities that are happening in the town. So we have very successful experiences as well, and I can tell you how we are doing that, working with the daycare center or the nursing home there. So it's a way to get around and to be in the outdoors, to be in the. So there are many experiences we should totally learn how does it work here, because it's another environment where we have a different relation with cycling for sure. Yeah. No question online. Okay. Is there any final comment? I think we've gone through a lot of many things. We have a lot of things to discuss during the coffee break and to think of. Thank you very much.